I'm thrilled to welcome Craig Parks to our show. He's the mastermind behind overall programming and audience and original content development for companies such as Comcast, IFC, YouTubers like Logan Paul. He's worked with MTV, VH1, and ABC Family as well. So if you're curious about how to connect with people through amazing stories and videos, you won't want to miss what Craig has to say. Let's dive in. It might seem like content has been the same way always, like sometimes it's hard to remember where we were 10 years ago. But back in that day, it was a thing, right? Platforms that would do a curation because it was sort of like the beginning of this content onslaught, and content kind of like the mass production, the end of content scarcity. So you had material like The Onion, Tastemade, BuzzFeed, The Young Turks. So if you could share a little bit about that experience, and what it taught you, right, about the media landscape and how it was changing.
Sure. Yeah. So Watchable was the whole premise with Watchable was that it was a curated collection of what we called premium short form content. And this was, of course, just to take everyone back. It was a time when Go 90 was out there trying to build an audience, spending unbelievable amounts of money in acquire content. You also had Killar's Vessel, which I think was maybe even the first one of those. And I think what was most interesting to me, I was very excited. I've always been very excited about what we now call the creator space, but back then that was not necessarily the way people tended to talk about in terms of short form content. But to me, it was really exciting, just this idea of sort of that anybody can go out there and create meaningful content that could transform people's lives and entertain and all this other stuff. And it was so obvious where it was all headed. And so it was really exciting to be in the space. But I will say that the premise of the Go 90s and the Vessels and even the Watchables was questionable. And I say this as a participant in it, and a willing participant
Mm-hmm.
in it, but I think one of the fundamental flaws was that um, YouTube was somehow this chaotic mess and no one could find what they wanted. And that was a premise that I heard a lot. Like that was the thesis in a lot of ways for why this platform, Watchable should exist or some of these others should exist. And to me, that sounded like a sort of a false problem. Like it was sure, yes, it can be, it can be chaotic. It can be a little challenging to find what you want, but for the most part, YouTube is pretty easy to find what you want, and a power user doesn't think that way at all, right? Especially talk to any young person. They're like, what are you talking? They would be, completely confused by that. But as a way of helping people find, to create a more bespoke experience that was tailored to your own personal interests. That was kind of interesting. So um, the idea I think of really identifying who the audience was for, who Watchable was for, trying to sort of separate us from Go 90 and the others was also a big part of this because rather than just try to become another destination, my challenge there, what I was trying to get us to do is to become a destination for certain types of people, for certain types of content. It's not necessarily where we started, but it's to me where I felt like we should go. The other part of Watchable, though, that made us unique versus Go 90 or Vessel was that we had the set top box for anybody. Watchable was available to anybody who had a phone. But if you were in a Comcast footprint and you had Comcast in your house, you can get all this content via the set top box. And it's the big reason why a lot of publishers were so willing to work with us, and because they wanted to be on the television, ironically, and they wanted to see if how people would they wanted to learn as well, just like we did. Will people watch short form content on the TV, and will it attract younger audiences, things like that, and this is where it gets really really interesting. From a programming perspective, my thinking in terms of how we would program the set top box experience for Watchable, what I thought people would gravitate towards would be the stuff that looked and felt like TV. So, for example, a good example of that would be whatchamacallit, Tastemade. Tastemade's content, beautiful, looks and feels like Food Channel or Food Network, and it's really good stuff. And so that's the kind of stuff that we would push. And lo and behold, no one watched it. And what did they watch? What did people watch the most on their televisions? Minecraft content. The kids at home who knew how to use that remote control and would be flying around looking for stuff that they couldn't find on TV, by the way, because they don't even know what the hell TV is. But with Minecraft content, I'm there. That was one thing. The other thing was all the stuff that was popular on the internet, cat videos, BuzzFeed, celebrity gossip, all that stuff that was on the Watchable platform that did well on the internet also did well on the set-top box. So this whole idea that people wouldn't sit down on their butts and watch short form content, they thought it was just some sort of magic mobile experience. That wasn't true. People will watch good content on any platform if it's what they want.
And you talk a lot about audiences, right? And serving them right. I'm assuming, did you have, and you were touching base on like a really specific audience that you had for Watchable? Was there like a specific age group? Because you mentioned kids, but because of some of the channels you had, I'm assuming you had also an audience of 30 plus, 40 plus in mind.
So when I came into Watchable, a lot of momentum had already been underway, and I don't think there wasn't a lot of work done at that moment, probably just in haste of trying to get this thing up and running around audience targeting and segmentation or anything like that. But what the message was is that this was for millennials. You have to remember also around 2014, 2015, it was millennial fever. Everyone wanted millennials, millennial this, millennial that.
Yeah, well, kind of those, yeah. I was the target audience, so
I
remember.
And so that became the catch-all. Like, we're for millennials. It's like, well, but then I got there and I was like, well, but you have Minecraft content that is absolutely no millennial. Maybe a younger millennial is watching it, but that was not who was watching this content. It was 10-year-olds, 8-year-olds, so on and so forth. There was just they rushed to get a lot of publishers on board, which made sense, right? To try to get this thing going, but there wasn't a lot of thought as to why. Why are we bringing on this particular publisher and this particular set of content? And then over time, it really became clear that if we were going to succeed, we had to differentiate ourselves some way. So I don't think we ever really fully developed. We weren't around long enough to fully develop a point of view on who exactly this was for. But I will say that when we looked at our original programming that we were doing, which is really what we were using as a audience acquisition tool, was really more about we were leaning into sort of people were putting in a really high level of quality, really thinking through, like challenging themselves to kind of get out of their comfort zone, do unique and unusual things. Like one of the biggest shows we did was actually with Logan Paul, but when he was on the rise at that point. It's before pre-Suicide Forest, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But what was interesting is that in a lot of ways, he kind of wasn't he wasn't the right person for us, because he was ultimately appealing to sort of a young teen kind of mentality. But for me, what was exciting about working with him was that his concept, to his credit, he came up with a really good idea, which is basically just him sort of putting himself in situations that were to try new things, really adventurous, crazy things. And you got an amazing director, and the execution was really smart. And so we were like, you know what, that actually does make sense, because he's getting out of his own comfort zone and trying something new. And so that was kind of how we were ultimately pushing things. We worked with some directors and first-time actors that now are becoming really big deals and stuff. Like that was sort of our approach going into it. And look, and some of the things worked, some of them didn't work, but the filter was starting to shape up, but unfortunately we had to shut it down.
Yeah, and I guess that happened a lot, especially I remember about that time, and I would say even prior to COVID, budgets were bigger. Many companies had money to burn, growth at all costs. So obviously that eventually had to stop. But you bring something super interesting, among the many things that you say, which is Logan Paul, right? And one thing, while I'm not a big fan of themselves, like again, like also I don't have anything against them, but one thing I can recognize is that those two brothers have like a natural instinct for coming up with new formats. They're super smart. Like even Jake Paul now with like, Mike Tyson boxing,
Yep.
like how he revitalized that and literally came up with a whole new type of content. Like you gotta appreciate that. You might like them or not, but they know what they're doing.
No, look, and I've been making stuff for well over 2 decades, and I've worked with pretty high level celebrities of different types over the years, and you eventually learn what makes a celebrity and why they are famous. And there's no doubt in my mind when I met him, it was like, yeah, he's a knucklehead on some levels, but it was very clear he was highly driven, highly focused, and a really clear idea of what he wanted to be. And he worked his ass off to get there. Forget no matter what you think of him, he did all the right things and does all the right things. I guess you could say. I don't really keep up with him anymore, but.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of keeping up, when I see your career, I see obviously, like you said, you've been doing this for a while. And one of the things that happens as we do this, I've definitely, as someone that started as a YouTuber 10 years ago, I've been through this challenge and I had this question myself. It's like, how do you grow with your audience? And by that I mean, we're content guys, right? But if I wanted to jump on a trend that 19-year-olds are doing, I can learn all about it, but I don't have it on my DNA, right? It's not like second nature. Like maybe you get a kid that it's 21, they're going to understand that audience a lot better. So I guess my question here is like, you were involved in a project, Peppermint, that was basically aiming at an audience of 55 plus, right? Because it is true, audiences will still consume content. Doesn't necessarily, it all ends with when you're 24. So what was your driver behind that? Like go for this group that is often overlooked.
Well, it's a good question. I mean, in terms of how one rolls with their audience over time is one. It's probably a whole podcast just to dedicate to that. And but I think in terms of this particular challenge, I mean, first off, I've spent most of my career chasing the next youngest audience. So that's at MTV, that was drilled in our heads, and it was ever since then in all the various places I've worked at. So when it came time to the challenge of creating content for an older audience, people who are 55 plus, excuse me, 65 plus, it was really interesting to me because I had my gut said that this was an audience that was highly underserved. And just again, because I've spent my whole life, like everyone else, trying to create content for the younger audiences. And then when I really started looking at the content that was made for these audiences, it was horrible. The content's generic, it's depressing, sometimes infantilizing. Growing old in this country sucks. It's just not a good place because we're so youth obsessed and all this stuff. So for me as a content creator, it was really exciting because guess what? If you're 55, you're 65, you're really smart, you've lived a long life, you know a lot of shit, you're an interesting person. Like to your point, it just doesn't end at 24 or 34. It keeps going and you keep becoming more interesting over time. I know we don't, it's hard to imagine that, but it's actually true. So to create content that recognizes people's maturity and wisdom and experience and sees them for who they are is exciting. And I guess to your point, I mean, how do you grow with your audience? How do you create experiences with your audience? To me, it all starts with spending as much time as humanly possible for this audience. One, get to know them, get to know everything about them, right? And ideally, spend time in their homes if it comes down to that. The second part of it is really understanding when you do get to know the audience, then understand what is it they need and when do they need it. The third part is related to your own personal brand. What are you here for? How are you here to help transform lives or create? What experience are you trying to create, and how can you deliver on that? So sort of those three parts: understanding the audience, understanding what it is they need at different times, right? Because we're all in different places at different times. I'm in my kitchen, I might need content one way. I'm in my couch chilling, I might need content a different way. I'm in my car, I might need it a different way. So that's, you have to sort of answer that question. And then lastly, yeah, I mean, like what is the experience you're trying to create, and how can you do that in the best possible way for this audience?
Hmm. And you have been a witness, right, to how like these experiences and how I mean, obviously we touch base on how we consume content and how that evolves. And we know consumers and brands have been evolving, right? Like now, I think it's more clear for everyone how this happened. Maybe 10 years ago, we're all still figuring out. And in a way, we are right. So, how do you think now with generative AI, how this is going to change? Because everything is going to be faster at a bigger scale. Obviously, you can say, well, we're going to be able to segment even further or like create content that is more customized. Uh, but do you see this really happen? Because you could also make a case that, well, we're just going to have a tsunami of content and nothing will matter anymore, which is sometimes I feel
Yeah.
both ways. So I want to know how you
Yeah.
feel
I mean,
about that.
I guess one of the advantages of one of the few advantages of getting older is that you start seeing the patterns. And I jumped in the digital thing pretty early on, and was around for all the different waves and bubbles where people thought this was going to change everything. This was, I mean, hard to imagine there was a time when people were as excited about blogs as they were about AI, but they were, and web series and all these other things that were at the time were brand new. Um, and so there's always a certain amount of cynicism. I think you should always have a certain amount of cynicism anytime Silicon Valley is shoving something down your throat. Um, and but I will say that in all cases, there is always a certain amount of truth to these bubbles. There is impact, and these are life changing things. You could point to every single thing that I've mentioned so far as something that has irrevocably changed the way we communicate and experience information and consume information. So, will AI have a huge impact? Absolutely. In terms of, can I definitively say what impact it will have? No. Except that it will have one. I will cop to being a little cynical, extra cynical about this, because I think there's already too much stuff being thrown at us at our own hands that we're all responsible for doing. We cannot consume the sheer amount of content that's coming out. And I just can't help but see, because I've seen this before, where it's just going to become a tsunami, as you say, of just stuff. And on the one hand, who cares, right? Okay, great. Whether it's human or not, I that's a whole other set of issues. But to me, what I am concerned about is misinformation, the wrong information. We already have a huge problem with it right now. I mean, my FYP is filled with misinformation, and I mostly follow smart people, right?
Yeah.
It still wants me to consume all kinds of evil misinformation. I don't know why, but it does, and it's just going to get worse and worse and worse, because it's going to get harder to determine. It's already hard to figure out what's real and what's wrong, what's real and what's not real, and it's going to get near impossible with deepfakes, with the quality of image creation or video creation and stuff. It's just going to get harder and harder, and I really, really worry about it, because we do such a poor job currently of teaching media literacy institutionally. We're, as sophisticated as we are as consumers, we're a bunch of idiots when it comes to understanding the power of media and how it can and does manipulate.
Yeah.
So that, in that sense, I'm very, 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 very worried about it. Are there cool things about it? 100%. I mean, I've already started using it as a tool to help think, brainstorm, think about structuring strategies and things like that. It's frightening how good and effective it can be. So, like everything, it's got its good and bad side. I think this one's going to be probably one of the more interesting ones in
Hmm.
terms of its impact on humanity.
Yeah, and you wrote an article that I recommend everybody reads, and I'm going to put the link both on the audio version of this podcast and on video, which is why content still matters in a world that has too much content, right? And some of it you've already covered, but like I want to, I want to go back to that and like us creative professionals, how can we still show, because you said there's so much content. And again, most people will not care. We can be all poetic, the importance of content and the human touch and emotions. But at the end
Yeah,
of the day, the same way that we got used to Zoom videos on mainstream media during COVID, which maybe 10, 15 years ago, that would have been unthinkable. And now we're all very comfortable watching gigantic pixels on our 4K TVs.
yeah.
And no one thinks twice about that. So my fear, and I'm waking up in the middle of the night. I don't know if that means I need to change careers. Going like, we're we're like 4 a.m. And I'm like, yeah, it's gonna like. But also, like, I'm really passionate about this. As much, bigger, I wouldn't have this podcast if I didn't care about like how can we make content better and the human side. But like, how can creative professionals still add value during these uncertain times in which
Yeah.
we don't really know what's going to happen, if we're honest?
No, we don't. And I think I would say it goes back to what I was saying earlier. I mean, look, the in very simplistic terms, we used to live in a time where the value of a piece of content was based on scarcity. There was only so much of it. It was special. Any piece of content over time, it's become less and less special. There's just more and more of it. Eventually, it becomes a commodity, right? And a commodity, you think about a commodity like corn, it's not corn that goes to the grocery store. That's not the commodity. It's corn that goes into, you know, livestock feed, fuel, and all this other stuff. It's a means to an end. That's a commodity.
Mm-hmm.
It means to, some kind of means to an end. Um, and that's how ultimately that has started to frame the way that I think about content. Now, there will always be the art side of content creation. People who go out and make a movie or make a TV show because they're trying to make a statement, get you to think differently, and those that I believe will always exist, and it's awesome. But in the world sort of around that and everything else, and that can include content marketing, social media, news, just in gaming, so many other things, that's when you really have to start thinking about, well, what is all this stuff that's coming at you? And this notion of it being a means to an end to me was really helpful, because it made me realize that, look, if I'm going to put a thing out there, whether it's a video or it's an infographic or an article or something, what do I want that content to do? What utility is it providing the audience, and how will that help me, the business, right? Or the brand, or whatever the case, however you want to think about it, is ultimately the two big questions that you ultimately want to ask here. Because it is relatively ephemeral, because chances are the thing you make is going to have a very, very limited lifespan, and that's okay. You know, I mean, early on, back in like the early web series days, people were spending, throwing huge amounts of money at celebrities to be in their web series, and sure, that episode or two might get tons and tons of views, but
Mm-hmm.
it just kind of faded away, because the specialness of it was misplaced. They put too much eggs in that basket, expecting the celebrity to do the good work. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's also kind of stupid if you think about it. Because as we now know, you don't need that to make a good story. You don't need, if you really know who you're talking to, if you're a real good, solid creator, it might actually do you harm to start working with celebrities, for example, because it's going to
Mm-hmm.
feel inauthentic. It's not going to feel right. So again, if you are creating, if you're a storyteller, and I hope to God that the humanness of the whole thing remains, that, that's ultimately what we're going to be seeking, is a real human connection through storytelling. Even if it's augmented by AI, great, that's fine. It's just another tool. But I'm still hopeful that we are humans by nature, and a connection is what drives us. Um, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and I think there's a little bit of a silver lining. I don't. How much YouTube do you consume nowadays?
Well, I'd say I'm fair amount right now. I'm big on TikTok, because I'm just fascinated by some of the creators and the level of comedy and ideas, thinkers, like people I would never like. I've gotten to know all about the oil and gas industry because of somebody I follow.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, this sounds good to me. I like to consume, I like to learn new things, so it's been great. But I could already feel it changing. I could already feel that algorithm is starting to. You've seen this happen with all the platforms. They're always fun in the beginning, and then eventually they go south. I could already feel
Yeah.
that happen.
Yeah,
But
it's time to
you know,
monetize, right? Like you get the
yeah,
TikTok
yeah.
shop all the time. It's the experience has
You
changed.
know, I probably consume more music than anything else. That's well, then that's been the constant in my life, and I go through ups and downs with other types of content.
Hmm. Yeah. One thing that I noticed, going back to YouTube, because I've been on TikTok, but I'll be honest, it's not my favorite platform. I'm still a YouTube guy through and through. And one thing that for me was encouraging, I've always hated what they call the retention editing. And for those that
Mm.
you don't no, it's not like think Mr. Beast, or other YouTubers. Like every 10 seconds you get a different image, and it's like an information overload because technically we all lost our ability to focus, which I think we did. But now what I've been seeing as encouraging is that we're going back to some sort of like OG YouTube kind of like cadence in which like you can have a guy talking on camera like we're doing right now, maybe a little bit of B-roll every now and then, but mostly it's just one steady shot and someone talking. And I think it's my theory again. Maybe we listen to this a year from now and we say, what a dumbass. He had no clue. But I do think we're going to embrace that imperfection. And just like TikTok, took us from the curated Instagram feed to people like being on camera, looking like they just woke up. I think as humans, while we like being told what to do, eventually we're still rebels at heart. So we're going to seek
Yeah,
that
yeah. I
craziness,
mean,
I
look,
think,
I
too.
think we're the one thing that I don't think we talk about enough is kind of is this notion of quality, right? I think in the beginning days of YouTube and the whole YouTuber scene, it was almost so much of it was about novelty,
Hmm.
and things like quality of information, quality of storytelling was less important. Personality, fancy editing, all that all that stuff that you're talking about for the sort of retention economy thing is was much more important. But I think that we are hardwired for quality at the end of the day. And especially with more and more information and more content out there, we're going to become more discerning over time to find the right stuff, the good stuff. And that could be a lot of different things. And to your point, I love the idea that nowadays you don't need to be fancy at all. You just have to be authentic and have to be, but you have to be smart and you have to be sharp. I mean, when I'm at this stage of my life, when I've been giving notes to creators who work for, who were creating content for an organization that we're all working for, my two biggest notes are globally, chances are whatever you give me the first cut, it's probably going to be too long, cut it by half. And they're going to be like, what? By half? I'm like, yeah, get rid of it. And the second thing is like, get to the point. It's like, usually it's just like, it goes on and on and on. I'm like, okay, why am I watching this? Because my attention is that fast, So I don't care that you made it. I don't care that it's beautiful. If I, the audience, don't understand what this is and what it's gonna do for me, I'm out. I got a million other things to do. So like it's that kind of stuff, like how to tell good stories is more important than ever before. And I think we're coming around to I think people are starting to realize that more and more that it's not easy to do. And that's that's an interesting side effect of all this stuff. Yes, it's easier than ever to create content. My kids, my two boys who are, they can edit like nobody's business, still can't tell a particularly good story. They're still learning that part. There's, how do you do that? How do you get people's attention? How do you lay out your thesis? How do you deliver on this? That stuff takes time. So
Yeah. And speaking of taking time, do you see the way they consume storytelling, right? Because at least for me, I've been actually playing with a GPT that explains you like Gen Z language, just
mm-hmm.
to understand. Because sometimes truly the memes, while I
Right.
feel I'm very attuned to what's going on, sometimes I go at look at the memes and I'm like, there's this face coming out of a toilet, and like kids are laughing, and I feel like I'm missing all the context. So I've been playing with that GPT, but
Yep.
like, do you think storytelling has changed for them from your perspective?
Yeah, hugely. Yes, and I still trying to understand how. I mean, in some senses, no, because a good story is a good story. But my 15-year-old now is will watch video games, playthroughs, and a lot of video game content that goes on forever, and I don't understand how in the world they sit through this stuff. But if your life is a particular game, and you really have talked about it with your friends and lived this game backwards and forwards and stuff, then I guess that form of storytelling would make sense, if you can call it storytelling.
Okay.
Um, but it goes back to the utility of it too. It's like, again, maybe it's not a story, maybe it's doing something else, right? So it's providing value some other way.
They say a good lawyer is the one that is smart enough not to represent itself, him, herself, themselves,
Mm-hmm.
when they're like going through some legal situation. And I feel the same way, we all work helping folks as content people in a way. We are attuned to branding, how you tell your story, right? But at least in my case, and I know it happens for many other creatives, when we have to tell our story, we don't do that well. And I can say that from the bottom of my heart, with all honesty. I could talk to anyone for an hour and figure out how to tell their story. I've spent decades being myself and I still struggle. So I was lucky enough that I ran into you and you were super helpful. We had a couple of conversations and you were like, oh, there's this and that. And as I got to learn more about you, I've been seeing this constant mentoring of new professionals. So obviously that's a very generous thing you do in an industry that it's not. I mean, there's a lot of generous people, but also there's a lot of people that are the opposite of right? So what's in it for you? What's the gratifying thing? It feels like a softball, but I really like, what are you getting out of it? In a time where it's all about the profit, disruption and all these keywords, like what are you getting out of helping a new generation of creatives?
Uh, well, thank you for saying that. It's very nice of you. But I guess for me it was, I'm pretty ambitious. I like to build things. I like to self improve. I'm very, the gratification I get tends to be through achievement rather than success, in the traditional sense of the word. I mean, of course, I love money and power like the next person, but really, what drives me is, you know, did I crush it? And if I don't know how to do something, how do I do this? Right. That's what drives me. And I think that's part of it too, is making sure you understand what motivates you. But in terms of why I mentor, partially because I have struggled in my life. I've hit walls. I've hit bottom in different ways, for different reasons, and my own bottom, whatever that is. It's different for everybody. And I've had people help me out of it. And that's one. I think two is, I think, to your point, it's easier to tell somebody else's story than your own. As I like to say, those of us who do rarely lift up our heads and take credit for what we do. We're usually too busy doing it, which is great. But unfortunately, in life, you got to kind of sometimes say, "Hey, I'm the guy who does this amazing thing," and that's not a
Mm-hmm.
natural state for most of us. Some people are really good at it. Good at it. Those people usually will throw you under the bus. That's a whole separate story.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a really important skill to develop. Ultimately, you have to tell your story, and doesn't mean you have to brag. Doesn't mean you have to be a dick, But it does mean that you have to know what you're good at so that people can see it. So that to be able to help people with that is seems like a pretty fun thing to do.
Yeah. And there will be a day, more than likely, Craig, I'm sure you know, that one of your kids can come to you and say, Dad, I want to be a content creator. I want to be a YouTuber. How are you
Please
getting
don't.
ready for
Please
that?
don't. Well, one of them already is really actually natively an amazing storyteller and editor and stuff like that. So he's very interested in it, which I support 1,000%. And as the only thing that I'm more concerned about is, do you have the work ethic to actually do it? Because that's is anybody who's done this for a while knows it's not easy, and it's a fight. It's a constant slog. So.
Yeah, and do you and again this is kind of like out of curiosity beyond the topics already discovered, but how do you like get them ready for like the audience's response, right? Because I think yes, the work ethic is important, but also, and this is I've worked with YouTubers like from unknown to like the biggest ones, and I could see, that it's still all of them. What shocked me, especially as someone immigrating to the US, where you have this idea that everything is like major league, and everybody's on a different level. And then you realize, no, they're just as human as I am, they have the same insecurities. And
Yeah.
mental health, it's a huge thing, and how the others view you. But even like when nothing happens with this piece of content, again, I'm sure many times you've been like, this is gonna crush it, and then nothing happens. And at least for me, whenever now I'm kind of over it, but it is upsetting. So how do you get them ready for that? If
Well, it's a good question. I think I did not come up in the days of where you could be your own producer, editor, director, star. And I think but putting yourself out there in any capacity is hard. And I think the best thing you could do is it goes back to the work ethic thing. All the people that I've ever known who are successful, even if they have native talent, and most of them do, they work their asses off. They are tireless. They're obsessed with working, and that's what you have to do. You just have to keep at it. I mean, so it's one interesting thing. Back to that knowing your audience. I think a lot of creators, you've heard this before, where influencers will say, "Well, I can't shill this thing or that because my audience won't like it." Or I got to be authentic or my audience will freak out. And I think that's a very good response. It makes sense, but I often question, really? Do you know why they're going to freak out? And will they really, or are you only responding to what Google and Facebook are telling you with the data? And that data is not wrong per se. It doesn't mean that it's wrong, but the why behind it is way more important, because what you might be doing is maybe it's the way you're delivering it. Maybe they do want it, but it's not coming out the right way, or maybe they don't even know they need it yet. And so you gotta really want to get in there and get dirty and get messy, in terms of your relationship with your audience, and so that you can make sure that you're maintaining that connection, that's going to help you grow as a creator ultimately.
mm-hmm. So would you say the key is not only think about, creating this video, telling the story, but also like thinking about going beyond the content, right? Like how's it going to impact what story you're telling? How's it going to be consumed? Were those the things you're referring
Yeah,
to?
yeah, and look, it's tough because especially if you're on the creator side, it's hard because it does become a rat race, and audiences can be incredibly fickle. As we know, certainly gaming content's really bad about that.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard, and that's really why, um, I think it's really important to kind of a sense of where you're ultimately going. What do you want to do in the long run? This is why so many creators burn out. But I think that knowing your audience, understanding how to serve them and what kind of relationship you want with them. But yeah, I mean, who are you as a brand, and what do you want to be? And the question I always ask when I'm doing mentors: what do you want to be when you grow up? I don't care if you're 50 or if you're 20. We're still figuring it out. No different for creators.
And I'm glad you're asking that, Craig, because usually the final question I ask, I made this podcast like in the beginning, I thought it was going to be about discussing generative technology. Then the more I learned, the more I educated myself. Obviously, it's a great tool, but I don't care as much anymore. It's a tool. It's a Grammarly, it's Photoshop. So I'm not going to make a specific show about using Photoshop. I care about the human creative experience and about talking to talented, smart, creative humans, such as yourself. So it's a double question for the end, which is what is keeping you passionate, after decades on an industry that can make you very jaded, especially as a Gen Xer, you grew up with Nirvana and all those. So it's kind of like by default, your generation, it's a little bit more inclined to the cynic, and mine's just like beaten up.
Yeah.
But like, what's keeping you passionate and what's next for you?
Um, well, I think I personally have always been attracted to mavericks and innovators, people who want to do things differently and push the envelope forward, and they don't just do it because they're rebelling, but they're doing it because they love. They usually love something in the past and want to make it their own, or want to try to address some situation that's going in their life. So they pull from the past to create a better experience in the future. Um, and that's ultimately that's the reason why I pushed myself into digital when and TV was going where it was going. Digital is where all the innovation was. The idea of democratization of storytelling, all these cool tools. I was just like, that, I want more of that. So I threw myself into that. I think the more I've learned about audience insights and the way that we consume media, it I think that that has fueled that sense of how do I create new experiences for audiences, and taking all these tools, whatever they may be, whether it's a blog or a web series or now generative AI or whatever the case, and how can we make a better experience for audiences? I think now at this point, I'm pretty beat up by the entertainment industry. It's not in a particularly good place. I've also worked with enough assholes in my life that I think I'm just done. I don't have the will to do it anymore, and God bless those who do.
Uh-huh.
It just lost the fun for me. So being able to now take what I do and bring it to different audiences for different purposes. Now I work at a place where I'm trying to transform lives through community and content, for an audience that is not normally given the time of day. That feels pretty good. So I think in terms of my future, I think that I want to continue working on things that make an impact as opposed to just putting more shit out into the world, because I did that for a long time. And again, no criticism. Love it, consume it all. I don't want to necessarily do it anymore personally.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think it's a natural cycle, right? That
yeah.
eventually we all look for meaning once, hopefully,
Once we see the end.
once we see the mess we've
Yeah,
contributed to
I
make,
mean,
we're like, oh,
I don't know. I mean, yes, I think what it is also is you just get smart and you start realizing what makes you happy and what doesn't make you happy, and what you have patience for and what you don't have patience for. And, how much does money matter and how much does this matter versus that, all of that stuff gets in more into focus as you get older, hopefully. Doesn't make it any easier, but it does get more into focus. So, yeah, that's where I'm at.
when's the TikTok account coming? Like, I would definitely, and I'm no joke, I would follow it because you have so much shit to share. Like, honestly, people creating content about content, it's kind of like you've seen them all, right? So I think there's a lot you can bring to the table, just throwing it out there.
Well, like you said, I am my own worst critic, my own worst editor. I would sit there and go like, "Well, I should talk about that." No, that's dumb. No, oh, no, that's dumb. I just would never. I could never. I've thought about it so long, and I have nowhere. I'm so amazed at people's comfort when they can get in front of a camera and just talk and talk. I'm just,
Well,
how do you do it? I have no idea. And here I am doing it. I realize. I get the irony. I just don't know how they do it. I still don't know how.
man, I'm an introvert. And
Well, that likewise, and that doesn't mean I don't have ideas, and I'm not. Yeah, I just it feels exhausting to do it.
it does. It does. Good. But like again, for a guy that is exhausted, you have a lot of energy. So maybe you're not as exhausted as you think. Craig, where can people find out more about you and connect with you and learn about your services or how you can provide value to their lives and
Well,
impact?
I mean, find me on LinkedIn. As some of you guys know, I'm really open to talking to anybody about anything. If you are looking for any kind of personal mentorship, I'm always willing to try to help. As long as you kind of want to put in the energy, I'll put in some energy as well. Um, and that's usually where I just kind of hang out mostly on LinkedIn. If you're interested in talking about kind of some of the work that I do, I'm currently working with a company called Wider Circle that is addressing a lot of these issues that seniors face in our lives, and I think they're doing some amazing work. So I'm helping them with some content strategy, and come find me. Let's hang out.
Excellent. We'll add links to all of that to the both the podcast, the audio version and the video version. We'll also be adding links to your Spotify playlist. I didn't mention this before. I was actually gonna open commenting on that, but
Well, dude, can I just say that LinkedIn is so overly serious, and I just want to make LinkedIn less serious. I mean, it's all fine if you talk about business, but good God, is it so inauthentic sometimes? Can we just have a little bit of fun? That's really, I try to bring a little bit of,
yeah.
yeah.
I'll send you a video by this guy. And actually his content sucks now, but he used to be really good. I can't remember his name. Like he made a video. It's like, this is why LinkedIn is the worst social platform ever. And it does make sense when you get that poetry. But anyway, we'll add all the links. We'll add your playlist. You got some Paul Weller replacements. So we love all of that. And yeah, Craig, thank you so much for your time. Again, this is a talk I have enjoyed, and I hope folks can learn more about you, you know, and again, I can vouch for how good you are as a mentor and as someone that helps you define your brand. Basically, you solve a years-long challenge for me, and for that, I'll be very grateful. So
I think the work you're doing is amazing, and keep at it. And I'm glad I could come on your podcast. It was super fun.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Have a good one.
Thank you for watching all the way. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to give it a like. And if you are listening to our audio version, please leave a review. It is very helpful. See you in the next episode of Creativity and Robots. Bye for now.